I am Laurel Bennett, 29 years old, a product designer living in Seattle, Washington. I grew up in a gray craftsman house on Willow Street with white window trim, a sloped roof, and a red door that my mother insisted matched the roses in our front yard. The house had a lemon tree in the back that never bore a single lemon, but my mother still bragged about it to neighbors. She said it made the yard look expensive. I always thought it looked lonely. It was in that same house that my life changed forever, on my mother's 50th birthday. She had invited everyone for a formal dinner, something she loved to host because it made her feel like royalty. The dining table was covered in gold runners, flickering candles, and crystal glasses that caught the chandelier's light. I sat quietly at the end, opposite my brother Ethan, who was already smirking before the toast even began. My father, Mark, looked proud and distracted, the way he always did when he thought my mother had everything under control. When the room fell silent, my mother stood, holding her glass high. Her smile was sharp enough to slice through the air. "Everyone," she began, "I have a little announcement. A gift to myself, you could say." I should have known nothing good would follow those words. "I've decided," she said with a flourish, "that Laurel will be moving out. Ethan will inherit the family property." For a moment, the world stopped. The hum of the chandelier, the soft music from the living room, all of it blurred. I blinked, unsure if I'd heard correctly. "Excuse me? You're 29, Laurel," she said, her tone flat, rehearsed. "You've had plenty of time to build your own life. You rent that little basement space for next to nothing. It's time we give Ethan and Paige a proper home for their new family." Ethan grinned, leaning back in his chair. "You'll be fine, Laurel. You're independent. You always land on your feet." Their words hit harder than I expected. I'd lived on the property for 5 years, ever since college, paying rent on time and helping with repairs. I had even spent my savings to redo the plumbing and repaint the exterior when my parents claimed they couldn't afford it. But none of that mattered now. I looked around the table, at the people who had shared my childhood, and realized that not a single one of them looked ashamed. My father just stared at his plate, fiddling with his cufflinks. My mother looked triumphant, as if she'd finally solved some long-standing inconvenience. I wanted to speak, to ask why, but then a memory flashed. 1 week earlier, at Pike Place Market, Grandpa Walter and I had shared fish and chips near the water. He had squeezed my hand and said, "Keep your head, Laurel. I've taken care of what matters." His words had puzzled me at the time, but the calm in his eyes made me believe he meant something deeper. So I said nothing. Instead, I lifted my glass of water, forced a smile, and said, "Happy birthday, Mom." The air in the room grew tight, like everyone expected me to beg or argue. I didn't. I stood, thanked them for dinner, and excused myself. That night, while they slept upstairs, I quietly packed my life into 2 suitcases. My books, sketch pads, my grandmother's blue teapot, the one she'd brought from England when she first came to America. I left a note on the kitchen counter that read, "Thank you for everything." Nothing more. When I stepped outside, the moon hung low over Willow Street. The house that once smelled like Sunday pancakes and lilac detergent now looked colder than I'd ever seen it. I locked the gate behind me and walked toward my car. The drive to my small apartment in Belltown felt endless. I replayed the dinner in my head again and again, each word scraping like sandpaper. Evicted. Air. Gift to myself. Those phrases looped until my chest ached. By the time I reached the city, dawn was breaking. I parked in front of my old building, carried my bags up the stairs, and unlocked the door to the place that would now have to be home. It wasn't much, a studio with peeling paint and thin walls, but it was mine. I made coffee, sat by the window, and looked out over the narrow street below. The sound of gulls echoed in the distance, mixing with the first buses of the morning. I thought about Grandpa again, his wrinkled hands, the way he always called me, the steady one. Something in me knew he had meant those words for a reason. Still, I cried. Not for losing a place to live, but for losing the illusion that family love was unconditional. My mother's laughter at that dinner would stay in my mind for years. Later that afternoon, I received a text from Ethan. "No hard feelings, right? You know how Mom is. It's just property. Just property. I stared at the message for a long time before turning off my phone. If only he knew how much of myself I had poured into that house, how many nights I'd stayed up sanding wood floors, how many weekends I'd spent fixing leaks. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. That night, I lit a small candle by the window and whispered to myself, "Keep your head." I didn't know what Grandpa had done or why he had sounded so sure, but I felt a quiet strength stir inside me. Whatever they thought they'd taken from me, they hadn't taken everything. When I finally closed my eyes, I saw the image of that old house one last time. The red door glowing under the porch light, the lemon tree swaying in the wind, stubborn and fruitless. For years, I had blamed the soil, the weather, everything but the truth. Maybe it hadn't grown because it wasn't meant to in that kind of home. That night, I promised myself that someday I'd have my own place, with my own lemon tree, one that would finally bear fruit. I didn't yet know that my grandfather had already made that possible, or that by morning, a team of lawyers would arrive at Willow Street to deliver a revelation that would turn my parents' world upside down. But for now, all I knew was that the first chapter of my independence had begun, not with celebration, but with eviction, silence, and an unexpected sense of peace. The morning after the birthday dinner, Seattle's sky hung low and gray, the kind of color that makes the city feel half asleep. I woke up in my tiny studio in Belltown, surrounded by unpacked boxes and the faint hum of traffic below. The hardwood floor creaked under my bare feet as I walked to the window. The parking lot outside was wet from overnight rain, and the air smelled faintly of coffee from the cafe across the street. I poured the last bit of instant coffee I had into a chipped mug and sat on the floor beside my laptop. I still couldn't wrap my head around what had happened. My mother had raised a glass to celebrate my eviction. My brother had smiled through it. I told myself I wouldn't cry, but there was something about the silence of that small apartment that made it impossible not to. I wiped my face and opened my bank app, $9,621.47. That was all I had after paying the deposit and first month's rent, $1, $8.50 for a space barely big enough to stretch out in. I told myself it was fine. At least I didn't owe anyone anything. At least this place, however small, was mine. I spent the morning unpacking, stacking boxes into a makeshift table, and laying my grandmother's blue teapot on the kitchen counter, like it was the centerpiece of my new life. The walls were thin, and I could hear my upstairs neighbor vacuuming. A cat somewhere outside yowled as if it had lost its best friend. Seattle's usual gray drizzle began tapping softly on the window. Just as I was about to go out for groceries, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Then another. Then 3 more in a row. I didn't answer. I slipped on my coat and headed out for coffee instead. When I turned onto Willow Street, my old street, I stopped short. My parents' house was surrounded by 3 sleek black sedans. A 4th car, an SUV, idled near the curb. My heart skipped. For people in dark suits stood in the drizzle, folders in hand. Lawyers, I thought immediately. I crossed the street and stood near the big maple tree across from the house. My mother appeared at the front door in her silk robe, looking irritated but curious. My father, in his usual weekend sweater, stood behind her, hands shoved deep into his pockets. Ethan hovered by the porch, wearing socks and confusion. The tallest woman among the visitors, silver-haired, confident, extended her hand to my mother. After a brief exchange, the lawyers stepped inside. I couldn't hear the words, but the voices rose quickly. Within minutes, my mother's color went from pale to furious red. My father took out his phone and began whispering into it, his forehead wrinkled in panic. Ethan paced like a man who'd just been told the rules of the game had changed. My pulse quickened. I didn't know what was happening, but instinct told me it had something to do with Grandpa Walter. A few minutes later, the silver-haired woman stepped outside, scanned the street, and locked eyes with me. She crossed the lawn, rain misting her suit jacket, and stopped right in front of me. "Miss Bennett," she asked. Her voice was professional but not cold. "Yes," I said, barely managing to steady my voice. "I'm Helen Shaw, from Preston and Clay Law Group. Your grandfather, Walter Bennett, retained our firm for estate matters. May I have a word? I nodded. My throat went dry. She opened her folio and glanced down at a document. Mr. Bennett created an irrevocable trust 4 months ago, she said. It contains the Willow Street property, a cottage on Bainbridge Island, and a brokerage account valued at approximately $1.45 million. You are the sole beneficiary. The air seemed to thin. I'm sorry, what? She continued, calm and clear. Your grandfather instructed us to withhold disclosure until a specific event occurred. That event, Ms. Bennett, was your eviction from the family property. I blinked, struggling to breathe. He knew. She nodded.
He did.
He anticipated that your parents might act as they did. His exact instructions were to inform all parties immediately upon your removal from the property. I glanced back toward the house. Through the rain-blurred window, I could see my mother arguing, her hands flying in disbelief. My father stood motionless, his face drained of color. Ethan had sat down on the porch steps, his expression unreadable. What about the cottage? I asked quietly, remembering the cedar cabin by the water where Grandpa used to take me fishing when I was a kid. That is included, Helen confirmed, along with the house and all attached land parcels. The titles have already transferred to the trust. As the beneficiary, you have full control. We'll handle the formal notifications today. Your parents will receive documents clarifying the transfer. I stood there, numb, as if the world had tilted beneath me. There's one more thing, she said, reaching into her folder. Mr. Bennett left a letter for you. She handed me an envelope sealed with his familiar handwriting, slanted, neat, deliberate. My chest tightened as I opened it. The scent of his cologne, the one he always wore on Sundays, drifted out faintly. Laurel, you see people clearly. You mend what others break, then you build something stronger. Keep what is yours. Choose carefully who stands near your table. Love, W. I pressed the letter against my heart, my eyes stinging. Across the street, my mother suddenly burst out of the door, waving her hands wildly at the lawyers. This must be a mistake, she shouted. He promised the property would stay in the family. Helen turned to her unshaken. It has, Mrs. Bennett, she said evenly. He simply chose which branch of the family. My father stepped forward then, his voice low but desperate. You can't just take our home away. Helen adjusted her folder. Legally, it was never yours. The documents have been filed with King County. The trust owns the property now. Ms. Bennett is the beneficiary. My mother's knees seemed to buckle. She clung to the porch rail, her face frozen in disbelief. Ethan just stared at me, speechless. I felt a strange calm wash over me. Not triumph, not vengeance, just peace. Grandpa had seen everything, even when I thought no one had. He had made sure justice didn't need an audience. Thank you, I told Helen softly. She nodded, handing me a business card. We'll be in touch to finalize your access to the trust accounts and arrange property management. Congratulations, Ms. Bennett. Your grandfather thought very highly of you. As she walked back to the SUV, I looked up at the Willow Street house, my old home, and now mine again. The lemon tree swayed in the breeze, drops of rain clinging to its leaves like small jewels. For the first time in years, it didn't look lonely. A flock of starlings burst from the gutter, scattering into the gray sky. Their wings shimmered like moving ink. I stood under the maple tree and smiled through the rain. Grandpa was gone, but his voice echoed in my mind, keep what is yours. And for once I intended to. That afternoon, the rain lifted from Seattle, leaving the city washed and silver. I drove downtown to Fifth Avenue, where the law offices of Preston and Clay occupied the 21st floor of a glass building that overlooked Elliott Bay. The lobby smelled of polished wood and fresh coffee. For a moment, I stood by the elevator doors, steadying my breath. I wasn't nervous. I was just aware that this meeting would officially change the shape of our family forever. When I stepped into the conference room, the view caught me first. The sound stretched endlessly, sunlight glinting off the water, fairies gliding in slow rhythm. It was the kind of view that made you think of clean beginnings. Helen Shaw was already there, reviewing documents in a thick leather binder. My parents sat across from each other in stiff silence. My mother's lipstick was perfect, her composure cracking only in the way she twisted her wedding ring. My father's jaw was clenched, his tie pulled too tight. Ethan sat beside them, tapping his foot under the table, the picture of impatience. Helen greeted me warmly. "Miss Bennet, thank you for coming. Please have a seat. We'll begin shortly." Another attorney entered, a calm, dark-haired man named Victor Hayes. He carried a smaller binder and gave me a polite nod before sitting beside Helen. When the room settled, Helen began. "Walter Bennet established what's formally known as the Willow Trust on June 2nd of this year," she said, her tone steady and practiced. Per his instructions, this meeting serves to notify all relevant parties of the trust's terms and assets. Victor opened his binder and read in a clear voice. Assets include 1321 Willow Street, appraised at $1,180,000, a Bainbridge Island cottage, appraised at $640,000, a brokerage account holding approximately $1,450,000 in municipal bonds and stocks, and a cash reserve of $120,000 for property maintenance and taxes. My mother gasped softly. Ethan stopped tapping his foot. My father just stared at the table. Victor continued. "The trust is irrevocable. The sole beneficiary is Ms. Laurel Bennet. The trustee is Preston and Clay. The grantor, Mr. Bennet, requested that, should any family member attempt to remove Ms. Bennet from the Willow property, the firm is to immediately activate disclosure of the trust to all parties. That event, as you know, occurred last evening." Silence filled the room. You could hear the faint hum of the city through the glass. My mother's voice broke at first. "Walter told us he'd keep things fair," she said, her words trembling between disbelief and fury. Helen nodded politely. "He did, Mrs. Bennet. He trusted you to be fair as well. But he also trusted Laurel to be steady." My father leaned forward, his voice rough. "We're her parents. We can guide her. She's young, I cut in before he could finish. "You can guide Ethan," I said evenly. "You tried to evict me from the basement I paid to renovate. I'm not a project. I'm your daughter." Ethan shifted in his chair. "Laurel, this isn't personal. Paige and I have a baby on the way. We need space. You don't even want that big house." I looked at him, his smooth, self-assured expression, the same one he'd worn at every family dinner where I'd been made to feel less. I took a deep breath. "If Paige needs quiet after the baby comes," I said, "the Bainbridge cottage is empty most of the year. We can talk about a short lease. At a fair rate. Through the trustee. No hidden rules." Ethan blinked. My father muttered something under his breath. My mother's lips tightened until they were almost white. "Laurel," she said softly, "we didn't mean to hurt you." "You meant control," I replied, meeting her eyes. "You wanted to decide who deserved what, and you used your birthday toast like a weapon. Grandpa asked me to choose who stands near my table. I'll choose, but not today." Helen nodded approvingly, as though silently acknowledging my restraint. She slid a few papers across the polished surface. "Two practical matters," she said. "First, we will be changing the locks at Willow Street this afternoon. Second, we recommend hiring a property manager and a CPA for your portfolio. I've listed 3 reputable firms in Seattle that Mr. Bennet had previously consulted." Then she reached into her folder and produced a sealed envelope. Mr. Bennet also left a personal letter to be opened at this stage. My hands trembled slightly as I accepted it. The envelope smelled faintly of cedar, just like the cabin on Bainbridge. Inside, written in his careful handwriting, was a list. "Roof needs new shingles by October. Estimate $14,500. Replace cracked garage slab, $7,900. Refinish oak floors, $6,200. Contractors, Nielsen and Company, Ballard. Pay full price, they have kids in college." I smiled through tears. It was so like him, thorough, kind, thinking not only about money but about people. He hadn't just left me wealth. He'd left me a plan. A map for how to care for what he'd built. Helen cleared her throat gently. He was very proud of you, Laurel, she said. He often spoke about how you worked quietly, without asking for recognition. He admired that. My mother stared at the table, her voice thin. He promised us he'd split things evenly. He said he'd talk to us about the house. He did talk to you, I said. You just didn't listen. You assumed fairness meant favor. Ethan sighed loudly. You're really going to take all of it? Just like that? I met his gaze. I didn't take anything. It was given. And I'll make sure it's used well. I'll maintain it, not waste it. For a long moment, no one spoke. The ticking clock on the wall filled the quiet. Finally, my father straightened his back. We'll contest it, he said. Helen shook her head. You can't. The trust is sealed and funded. Mr. Bennett's decisions were witnessed and notarized. There's no legal ground for challenge. My father looked at me as if I'd personally betrayed him. You're tearing this family apart. I smiled sadly. You did that when you decided I was disposable. He had no response. Helen closed the binder. That concludes our reading. We'll send digital copies of all trust documents to you, Ms. Bennett. If you have any questions, Victor and I are available at any time. I stood, tucking Grandpa's letter into my bag. Thank you, I said quietly. As I turned to leave, my mother called after me. Laurel, please. Can we fix this? I paused at the door. Not today, Mom. Maybe someday. But today, I'm going home. When I stepped out into the hallway, the late afternoon light poured through the tall windows. The city buzzed below, honking horns, fairy whistles, life moving on. I exhaled slowly. The air felt lighter. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like the overlooked daughter. I felt like someone who finally belonged somewhere, because Grandpa had seen me, believed in me, and built a safety net beneath every cruel word they'd thrown my way. As I rode the elevator down, I thought about the list he'd left me. The repairs, the small notes, the kindness in each line. It wasn't just a house anymore. It was a legacy and a promise that I intended to keep. 2 weeks later, I moved back into the Craftsman house on Willow Street, not as a tenant waiting for approval, but as the rightful owner holding the keys. The moment I stepped inside, the air felt different. The same warm wood trim, the same creaking staircase, yet the silence carried a sense of freedom. The house no longer belonged to my parents' pride or their control. It was finally mine. The lemon tree still stood in the backyard, stubborn and bare as always. I touched one of its branches and smiled. You and me both, I whispered. It hadn't produced a single lemon in years, but now I was determined to change that. I kept the red front door, though I had it repainted in fresh lacquer until it gleamed under the morning sun. I decided the basement needed light and life, so I painted it soft white, replaced the flooring, and rented it to a nurse named Serena who worked long shifts at Harborview Medical Center. She paid $1,600 a month, utilities included. The cottage on Bainbridge Island needed care, too. I hired a property manager for $225 a month and set a fair seasonal rate for short stays. I spent $80,000 on renovations, new shingles for the roof, refinished floors, and a complete electrical upgrade. Another $35,000 went into a maintenance reserve account, as Grandpa's letter had instructed. I even met with Gloria, a local CPA with calm eyes and a sharp mind, who helped me set up clean financial books for the trust. She said, "Your grandfather planned everything down to the decimal. He must have really believed in you." I smiled. He did. The first week back in the house was peaceful until the phone calls started. My mother called every day, sometimes twice. I ignored most of them, letting them ring out until the sound became part of the background noise. On the 8th day, I finally picked up. "Laurel," she said, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. "We're sorry. We were proud of Ethan and forgot to be kind to you. Please come to dinner." "No," I said quietly. "Not now." Her breath caught. "Are you going to cut us off completely?" "I'm going to set terms," I replied. "If you talk about heirs or fairness, I'll leave. If you ask for money without a plan, the answer is no. If you respect me, We can meet at a diner on 3rd Avenue at noon for 1 hour only. There was a long pause, then a soft sigh. All right, she whispered. We met 2 days later. The diner was small and smelled of coffee and cinnamon. I wore a gray sweater. No makeup, no armor. My father looked older than I remembered. My mother's hands trembled when she picked up her cup. She apologized first, haltingly. My father followed. It wasn't dramatic, it sounded real. I listened, but I didn't rush to forgive. I told them I wasn't seeking revenge. I just needed peace. When the bill came, I paid for myself and stood up. Take care, I said, and left them to pay theirs. That night, for the first time in years, I didn't feel like the family's invisible daughter. I felt like my own person. As fall settled over Seattle, I drove to the Bainbridge cottage. The ferry ride was quiet, the air cool with sea salt. The cedar cabin looked just as I remembered, its blue canoe pulled up by the shore, the wood stove still smelling faintly of smoke and applewood. Inside, I found Grandpa's old ledger on the desk where he used to do his crossword puzzles. I flipped through the yellowed pages and saw notes about every expense he'd tracked with care. I added a new line. October, roof done, $14,700. The roofing crew brought donuts. I smiled. He would have liked that. I spent that night at the cottage, wrapped in a quilt, listening to the waves hit the rocks. The quiet was comforting, almost sacred. For years, I'd tried to earn my parents' approval. Now, I realized I didn't need it. I already had something better, a life built on honesty and self-respect. Thanksgiving arrived sooner than I expected. This time, I didn't go to my parents' house. Instead, I hosted a small dinner at Willow Street. Serena came, exhausted from a night shift but smiling. My friend Jamie, a fellow designer from the studio, brought sparkling cider. My elderly neighbor, Mr. Alvarez, showed up carrying a basket of bright yellow lemons from his own tree. The irony wasn't lost on me. I cooked a simple meal: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and pumpkin pie. We set 4 plates and sat around the oak table. The candles flickered gently as rain tapped against the windows. For a few seconds, we held hands in silence, giving quiet thanks. I looked around and realized this small circle was family. Not the kind bound by blood, but by choice and kindness. Later that week, I received a letter from Helen Shaw. Inside was the final statement of the trust transfer and a small handwritten note at the bottom. Your grandfather asked me to pass along one more message. He said, Laurel builds. She will not hoard. She will set a fair rent, a clear price, a true boundary. She will keep a red door and an open heart. I framed that note and placed it on the mantel above the fireplace. It belonged there, like a quiet reminder of who I was becoming. Outside, the lemon tree swayed in the wind, still green, still barren. But I had an idea. I called a nursery in Ballard and ordered another lemon tree, $129, to plant beside it. Maybe, I thought, they'd learn from each other. Maybe they'd grow together. Or maybe they'd just stand side by side, stubborn and alive. Either way, I'd take it. People often say family is everything. I've learned that's not always true. Family is the people who don't toast to your eviction, even when they're angry. Family is the friend who shows up with a drill when your door sticks. It's the lawyer who reads every fine line of your grandfather's will. It's the neighbor who hands you lemons and laughs at your bad jokes. My parents still text sometimes, short, polite messages about birthdays or the weather. I answer sometimes. I'm not cruel. I'm just clear. Some doors don't need to be shut forever, but they don't need to swing wide open either. Now, when I lock my red front door at night, I listen to the sound it makes, soft, steady, final. It's not the sound of closing off the past. It's the sound of owning my peace. I live in America, in a gray house with a red door and a lemon tree that's learning to grow. I keep Grandpa's letter near the fireplace and his repair list in the kitchen drawer. Every night before bed, I look around my quiet home and whisper a promise. I will build. I will keep my table open, but only for those who come with respect. And somehow that's enough.